When the oncologist told me I had 60 days left to live, I didn't cry. I bought a one-way ticket back to Chicago, intending to spend my final weeks comforting my mother and saying my goodbyes. But when I unlocked my childhood home, it was completely empty. No one answered my calls. It wasn't until I rushed to the local hospital that I found my mother, frail and hooked to machines in the ICU, completely abandoned. The nurse handed me her medical chart, and what I read sent a wave of icy rage through my veins. My mom wasn't just sick. She was being slowly, deliberately neglected while her life savings were drained. And miles away at a luxury resort, my sister and her husband were throwing a lavish party with my mother's money. They thought my diagnosis meant I was too weak to stop them. They were dead wrong. My name is Clara Vance. I am 32 years old, and up until 3 weeks ago, I believed my biggest struggle in life was managing my demanding career as a senior risk auditor in Boston. But life has a twisted way of shifting your priorities in a single second. The doctor's office had been dead silent when he placed the scans on the light board. Stage 4. Aggressive, untreatable. 2 months, maybe 3 if I was lucky. I didn't spend days mourning the life I wouldn't get to live. Instead, my thoughts immediately went to my mother, Eleanor. My father had passed away 6 years ago, leaving her alone in our family home in the suburbs of Chicago. I packed 2 suitcases, gave up the lease on my apartment, and boarded a flight home, determined to spend every remaining breath ensuring my mother knew she was loved. I arrived in Chicago on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The key was still under the fake stone by the porch, just as it had been for 20 years. But when the front door swung open, the familiar smell of home, vanilla candles and fresh coffee, was replaced by a damp, stagnant chill. The house was dead quiet. Furniture was covered in sheets, dust lay thick on the hardwood, and a pile of unopened mail sat yellowing on the entry table. I called out for my mother, my voice echoing off the bare walls, but there was no response. Panic started setting in. I dialed her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed my younger sister, Chloe. It rang 4 times before dropping to a generic recorded tone. Standing in that cold, empty hallway, holding a terminal diagnosis in my purse, I realized something was horribly wrong. I drove straight to St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, the primary medical center near our neighborhood. It took 20 minutes of pleading with the front desk receptionist before she finally found my mother in their system. Eleanor Vance had been admitted 3 days ago through the emergency room, listed under a severe dehydration and malnutrition protocol. When I walked into room 412 of the ICU, the breath was knocked clean out of my chest. My mother, a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of everyone else, looked paper-thin against the hospital sheets. Machines beeped rhythmically beside her, while a clear liquid dripped slowly into her vein. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and ragged. I sat by her bedside, holding her frail, cold hand, tears finally spilling over my lashes. A senior nurse walked in to check her vitals. When I introduced myself as Eleanor's eldest daughter, the nurse's expression shifted from professional detachment to quiet disbelief. She pulled me into the hallway and handed me Eleanor's intake chart. My mother hadn't been living in our childhood home. 8 months ago, Chloe had moved her into a cut-rate, unaccredited private care facility on the edge of town. The hospital had tried reaching Chloe dozens of times over the past 48 hours because Eleanor's condition was critical, but Chloe had blocked the hospital's main number. The intake notes were horrific: severe neglect, unmanaged medication, and absolute isolation. Chloe had signed a full power of attorney agreement 6 months prior, stripping my mother of her independent decision-making rights under the guise of protecting her health. Rage replaced the heavy grief in my chest. I couldn't understand how Chloe could do this until I started looking into our family's affairs. The next morning, while my mother remained stable under intensive monitoring, I went to the main downtown branch of First Midwest Bank. Before moving to Boston, I had been listed as a secondary joint holder on my mother's primary checking account to help her pay utility bills after my father died. Chloe had tried to remove my name months ago, but due to a clerical oversight by the bank, my authorization had never been fully revoked. Sitting in a private office with a bank manager, I requested 3 years of comprehensive transaction logs, home equity loan records, and retirement portfolio movements. What the paper trail revealed made my stomach turn. Eleanor's life savings, over $450,000 built up over 4 decades of hard work, had been systematically drained. Large wire transfers had been executed over the last 6 months, moving funds directly into an LLC named Vance and Sterling Holdings. The registered owners of that shell company were my sister, Chloe, and her husband, Mark Sterling. They hadn't just taken her savings, they had taken out a second mortgage on our childhood home, pulling out every cent of equity and leaving the house facing foreclosure. While sitting in my rental car outside the bank, my hands shaking with pure anger, I opened my phone and pulled up Chloe's social media profile. What I saw made my blood boil. While our mother lay unconscious in an ICU bed fighting for her life, Chloe and Mark were posting live video updates from a 5-star lakefront resort 2 hours away. They were hosting an extravagant weekend celebration for Mark's family, complete with rented yachts, expensive wine, and catered dinners. Caption after caption bragged about their booming real estate development firm and their new self-made fortune. They were burning through my mother's life savings to impress Mark's wealthy parents, completely confident that our mother would pass away quietly in a substandard care home and that I was dying thousands of miles away, incapable of stopping them. They thought I was weak. They thought my diagnosis made me helpless. They forgot who I was before I got sick. I spent 6 years auditing high-level corporate fraud, digging through hidden paper trails, and holding corrupt executives accountable. If I only had 2 months left to live, I wasn't going to spend them weeping in a corner. I was going to use every single second I had left to burn their house of cards to the ground. I drove back to the hospital, set up my laptop on the small tray table next to my mother's bed, and went to work. For 4 straight hours, I compiled digital evidence. I cross-referenced the illegal wire transfers with my mother's medical intake dates, proving that power of attorney documents had been executed under duress while my mother was cognitively impaired. I gathered copies of the forged signatures, the fraudulent LLC filings, and the bank statements showing direct transfers from Eleanor's life savings to Mark's resort accounts. Then I picked up my phone and made one targeted call. I didn't call Chloe to scream at her. I didn't send an angry text. Instead, I dialed the direct line of the State Financial Crimes Division, specifically reaching out to an elder abuse prosecutor I had worked alongside on a previous corporate investigation. I laid out the digital evidence, emailed over the encrypted file folder, and flagged the case for emergency intervention under state elder exploitation statutes. Within 45 minutes, an emergency injunction was filed, freezing every single account associated with Vance and Sterling Holdings and issuing an immediate subpoena for Chloe and Mark. I closed my laptop, kissed my mother's forehead, and drove straight to the Grandview Lake Resort. The resort was breathtaking, surrounded by manicured lawns and shimmering blue water. I walked through the grand marble lobby, past guests in designer resort wear, completely unbothered by how exhausted or pale I looked. I followed the sound of clinking glasses and laughter toward the private dining terrace overlooking the lake. There they were. Chloe was wearing an expensive white silk dress, laughing loudly as Mark poured champagne for his father, a prominent local business owner who took great pride in his family's respectable reputation. The long table was covered in floral arrangements, fine china, and luxury gifts. I stepped onto the terrace. The heels of my shoes clicked sharply against the stone floor. "It's a beautiful party, Chloe. Mind if I join?" The laughter at the table died instantly. Chloe turned around, her glass freezing halfway to her lips. Color drained from her face, as if she had just seen a ghost. "Clara? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Boston. You're sick." I said, my voice calm, steady, and carrying across the quiet terrace. "But then I came home to visit Mom, only to find her dying alone in an ICU while you used her life savings to pay for your catered seafood tower." Mark stood up quickly, his face flushing red with anger. "Clara, keep your voice down. You don't know what you're talking about. This is a private family event." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, Mark," I replied, pulling a thick manila folder from my tote bag and tossing it squarely onto the center of the dining table, knocking over a glass of water. In that folder, Mark's parents will find the exact wire transfer logs showing that the capital investment you claimed you made into your business came directly from my mother's pension fund. Page 4 shows the forged power of attorney documents. Page 8 shows the invoice for this exact party, charged to an account built on elder fraud. Mark's father picked up the folder, his eyebrows knitting together as he began skimming the bank statements and legal affidavits. His expression turned from confusion to absolute horror. "Mark, what is this? Is this where the investment money came from?" Chloe panicked, stepping toward me with her hands raised. "Clara, stop it. Mom was sick anyway. We were just managing her assets for her future. We were going to pay it back once Mark's business took off." "She wasn't just sick, Chloe. You put her in a neglected facility and ignored the hospital's emergency calls so she wouldn't wake up to see what you did," I said, leaning in close so only she could hear. "And you thought I'd be too busy dying to notice." Before Mark could try to grab the documents, 2 marked police cruisers and an unmarked state investigator vehicle pulled up into the resort's valet circle. 3 officers walked swiftly up the terrace stairs. The lead investigator approached our table, looking directly at Mark and Chloe. "Chloe Vance?" "Mark Sterling," the officer asked. Chloe gasped, taking a step back. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private event. You are both being taken into custody pending formal charges for aggravated elder financial exploitation, grand larceny, and forgery," the investigator stated calmly, producing 2 sets of handcuffs. "Your corporate and personal accounts have been frozen by court order as of 20 minutes ago." Mark turned on Chloe instantly, his voice cracking with desperation. "You said your sister was dying. You said there wouldn't be anyone left to check the accounts." The entire terrace went dead silent. Mark's father looked at his son with utter disgust, throwing the manila folder back onto the table and walking away without saying a single word. Mark and Chloe were handcuffed right there in front of their friends, their in-laws, and the entire resort staff. As the officers led them down the marble steps toward the waiting police cars, Chloe looked back at me, sobbing hysterically, begging me to fix it. I stood on the terrace, watching their grand facade collapse into absolute ruin in less than an hour, feeling no anger left, only an overwhelming sense of relief. Over the next 3 weeks, everything changed. With the court order in place, I was granted full emergency legal guardianship over my mother. The frozen funds were recovered and transferred into an irrevocable trust designed exclusively for her health care and security. I moved Eleanor out of St. Jude's and into one of the top specialized care centers in the state, where she received round-the-clock physical therapy and medical attention. Within 15 days, the color returned to her cheeks. She was sitting up in bed, and for the first time in months, she smiled and recognized my voice. While managing my mother's transition, the lead physician at her new medical center noticed the severe fatigue and physical strain I was under. After learning about my terminal diagnosis from Boston, he strongly urged me to let his team conduct a comprehensive review of my original scans and run a new battery of tests using their advanced diagnostic lab. 2 days later, the chief of oncology called me into his office. He sat down across from me, holding 2 sets of imaging files. "Clara, I don't know who read your initial scans in Boston, but they made a catastrophic misinterpretation," he said, turning the screens toward me. "You do not have stage 4 terminal cancer. You have a rare, severe inflammatory autoimmune mass that closely mimics advanced tumors on low-resolution scans. It is non-cancerous, completely localized, and entirely treatable with targeted medication." I sat in that office for a long time, listening to the doctor outline a 6-month treatment plan that had a 95% success rate. The sentence of death that had been hanging over my head for months simply evaporated into thin air. Today, 3 months after that rainy afternoon in Chicago, I sit on the sun porch of a new, quiet home my mother and I rent together near the lake. Eleanor is sitting across from me, knitting a scarf, her health fully restored. Chloe and Mark are currently awaiting trial, facing significant prison time and mandatory restitution orders that will ensure they can never touch another cent of my mother's money. Sometimes, when the wind blows off Lake Michigan, I think about that phone call I made from a hospital parking lot. I thought I was spending my last remaining days fighting a final battle for the woman who gave me life. Instead, standing up to the truth didn't just save my mother, it gave me my life back, clear, honest, and completely free.